Hello and welcome to the Blue Open Studio tutorial video series. The topic of this video will be alarms. In this video, we will be discussing the different types of alarms, how alarms are configured and stored, the properties of the alarm worksheet, the properties of the alarm and event control object, and we will demonstrate creating an alarm worksheet, configuring the alarm event control object, triggering and filtering different alarms, locating alarm files in Windows Explorer, and viewing alarm files outside of Blue Open Studio. In Blue Open Studio, there are 7 different types of alarms. We have high and high, and these are essentially alarms where when the value gets too high or high, it will generate the alarm based on the limits that are configured for each. Then we have low and low, which are on the opposite end. When the alarm reaches the low or low limit, it will trigger an alarm. Then we have a rate, which determines the rate of change for the value of the tag. And if this variation is higher than the established one configured, it will generate an alarm. And speed can be determined per second, per minute, or per hour. And then we have deviation plus and minus. And these alarms are triggered when the tag value goes outside of a deviation limit for either positive or negative. And these do not have to be configured the same. So the deviation plus could be 15 and the deviation minus could be 20. And it would trigger a deviation plus or minus based on the value of the tag being outside of those ranges. And here we show a chart that gives a graphical representation of how the alarms can be configured. Let's say, for example, we have our tag value coming in and it's the black line. So we have the value here. It reaches the low limit here, we get an alarm. It reaches the low limit here, we get another alarm. The value bottoms out, then starts coming back up. Once it reaches higher than the low limit, alarm will be recovered. Then once it reaches the low limit, that alarm will be recovered. And we see here that the value increases too quickly based on our rate of change. So we get an alarm triggered for that. And let's say then that it spikes up, it goes past high, an alarm gets triggered there, and then it goes past high. Once again, another alarm is generated. And then we have the deadband value in time. And as we see here, the value of the tag fluctuates within a certain amount of time. So we can ignore that fluctuation and not trigger an alarm based on that. And then we see it come back down and it normalizes here, but then we see it fluctuate a little bit more. Well, if we have a deviation plus and minus set, we will get an alarm whenever the tag goes outside of those values. And this green line represents the deviation set point. So to configure alarms inside of Blue Open Studio, you have to keep in mind that all of the features and functionality inside of the software are driven by the tags. At the core of this are the tags. So unlike GP Pro EX, we don't configure a worksheet to include certain addresses or in our case tags for alarms. What we do is we configure the alarms for the tags and then we can group them on alarm worksheets. It's a little confusing at first, but once you start doing it, you'll get the hang of it and you'll understand exactly the relationship between the tags and the alarm worksheets, and then of course the alarm event control objects on the screens. So we're going to show both ways to configure the alarms. The first is through the tags themselves. So what I'm going to do is up on the menu, I will make sure I'm on the Home tab, and off to the far right will be the Tags group. I will click on this Object Finder, and when the Object Finder comes up, under Selection, I'll start to type in Flow, and I'll double click on Flow Rate, and then I will click on the Properties button. And what this does, it brings up a dialog for the properties of the tag selected. And in our case, we want to go to alarms-integer/real type. And we see that we can now configure alarms here. So what we want to do is for this tag, we want to set up the rate and deviation alarms. So I'm going to check the boxes for rate, deviation plus, and deviation minus. And you see when I do that, I now get the fields that I need to configure for each alarm. And then up at the top, this alarms enable box gets checked. And then translation enabled gets checked by default. And this once again goes back to the multi-language feature that we will discuss in another video. So for the rate, I'm going to enter a value in here of 5. And now I have to select the actual rate. So by default, it's set to 1 per minute, or 1/minute. And essentially what that means is with my value entered in here of 5, it's going to be 5 per minute. So a value of 5. I could change this to per second or per hour. I'm going to set it to second. And then for the message, I'm going to enter in flow rate flux. And now we have fields for group, priority, and selection. And these are basically just to allow you to filter out alarms based on these different settings. So for this, we are going to set group to 2, priority to 1, and selection we will set to area C. Now I'll tab over to deviation plus, and for its limit, I'm going to set it to 10. And then for the message, I will put in flow rate dev plus error. Group I will set to 2, priority I will set to 2, and selection I will set to area D. And then for deviation minus, I'm going to set the value to 20. And I'm going to copy the message out of deviation plus and simply change the plus sign to a minus. Then the group will be 2, priority will be 2, and selection will be area D. Now, we have the deviation plus or minus set, but we also have to fill in the field here for the deviation set point. And this set point is the value that will be interrogated. So if the tag goes beyond this value, say by 10 or more, we will get a deviation plus alarm generated. If it goes below this value by 20 or more, we will get a deviation minus alarm generated. So for the set point, with our sliders, we set the flow rate between 0 and 100. I'm just going to go into the middle and put in 50. And now for the deviation deadband, this is the value which the tag has to come into in order for the alarm to be normalized. So for example, if we put a 2 in here with a set point of 50, in order for it to be normalized, the tag has to be anywhere between 52 and 48. So for example, if we have a deviation plus alarm, when the value comes back down, it can't get to, say, 60 and then 59. And once it hits 59, the alarm would normally be recovered or normalized. With a deadband configured, it now has to drop all the way down to 52 in order to normalize. And the same for the deviation minus. For us, we're just going to leave the set to 0. And then we are going to click OK. So now we have the alarms rate and deviation configured for the flow rate tag. The alarm worksheets are located on the Tasks tab under Project Explorer. And you see, even though we have those alarms configured for the flow rate tag, we do not see a worksheet here. If I right click and select Insert, and then I put in a description, and I will just give it flow rate alarms. And the group name will be flow rate. So now I have the description and the group name configured, and we will discuss these fields in a second. But for now, I'm just going to close the worksheet, and I'm going to save it. But I'm not going to save it as sheet number 1. I'm going to save it as sheet number 2. And we now see that it shows up under my alarms folder. And now if I double click and open it, you see that my flow rate tag alarms for the rate and deviation plus and minus have been automatically added to this worksheet. And that is because of the number that we save this worksheet as, number 2. It corresponds to this group number here. So there are 2 ways to configure it. The first would be, as we showed, you go into the tag properties, configure the alarms, give it the group, and then you just simply add that worksheet, and now you have those tags configured onto this worksheet. And the worksheet is simply for filtering out what the different alarm groups are in development. So instead of going into each tag and checking what alarms are configured for that, you can come to the worksheet and see for that group what tags are configured with what alarms. So now we'll look at the second way to configure the alarms, and this is simply by configuring the alarm worksheet itself. So I'm going to close this worksheet, and on the Project Explorer, I'm going to right-click on Alarms Group and select Insert. And then we insert a new alarm worksheet. And the worksheet, like most others inside of the software, are broken up into a header at the top and a body at the bottom. And inside of the header, we have our description field, which for this worksheet, we're going to enter in temperature, alarms, and then we have a group name. And this is simply a label to give it to better filter out the alarms during runtime. And for this, I'm just going to enter in temperature. And then we have 2 buttons to the right of that, email settings and advanced. So if we click on email settings, we see the settings to send out an automatic email whenever specific events occur. So if I enable this, I can now enter in the sender addresses. I can give it what information I want inside of the format, what items to give it for the alarms and their order, what the separator is going to be, if I want to use the alarm message or make a custom subject line, and then any other information I need or I want to enter in order to configure this email message. And we see that there's a sample here of how this message format is configured. And this is outside of the standard email or FTP setting inside of Blue Open Studio, which we'll discuss in another video. This is independent of that, and this works strictly for alarms themselves, specifically for this group. So you can set up email settings for each group, not just the alarm feature in general. For us, though, I'm going to leave it disabled. Then under Advanced, we see that we have several fields here that are empty. We have a disable, total alarms, total unacknowledged, remote, acknowledged trigger. And what these are is you would put a tag in here. And this tag would allow you to either disable or list the total number of alarms or total unacknowledged or the remote acknowledgement trigger. So these tags can be used for not only displaying information for the alarm group, but also to manipulate or interact with the alarms themselves. For us, though, we are going to leave all of these blank. And then below that, we have the online group. When the display and alarm controls box is checked, the alarms are available to be displayed in the alarm event control object. So you can uncheck this and you can have alarms being triggered, but you can prevent them from being displayed. So if you just simply want background alarms that may be doing some other task, say sending off to a device or triggering a script, whatever the case may be. Or if you want to disable the display of these alarms temporarily, you would simply come in here and you would uncheck that box. By default, it's checked. And then we have Acknowledgement Required. And this requires acknowledgement when the box is checked, which means that when the alarms are displayed in the alarm event control object for online mode, until they are acknowledged and normalized, they will not disappear. With this box unchecked, acknowledgement's not required, and as soon as they become normalized, then they disappear off of the control object. Then we have a beep, and the computer beeps while there are alarms to be acknowledged. So if we have unacknowledged alarms for this group and that box is checked, the computer will beep, and this is like the buzzer off of the motherboard or any built-in speaker or buzzer that you have for the PC. And then send to printer. This feature has depreciated in capability because the DOS print command that it invokes has been essentially depreciated inside of Windows 7 and later operating systems. Typically, when that box is checked, it would immediately send the alarm to a printer when it is triggered or when it is generated. Now what it does is the alarm messages are simply passed to an external batch file as soon as the alarm is generated. And you can edit this batch file to process the alarm messages as you so desire. And it is located inside of the bin subfolder for the Blue Open Studio software. And then to the right of that, we have the history group. And the save to disk, when this box is checked, it will store alarms in a history log when they are generated. In order to enable the bottom two, we have to check the box for save to disk. And now the generate acknowledgement messages and generate normalized messages, what these do is the alarm messages that are stored in the history log, we place another entry in that history log when they are acknowledged and when they are normalized. With these unchecked, all that it does is when the alarm is generated, it drops a new line into that history log, and that is it. It doesn't give us a brand new line for acknowledgement or normalization. For now, we will leave this unchecked. And then to the right of that are the colors in alarm controls. And what this allows you to do is configure custom colors for the selection or highlight or activation of an alarm, the acknowledgement and normalization. And it can be the foreground and the background. The default are red for active, green for acknowledged, and a sky blue for normalized. We could disable this and use the colors we configure for the alarm event control object instead. For us though, we're going to leave it set at default. So we now have our header configured the way we want, and now we can start entering in our alarms. So we have several columns. We have the tag name, the type, which corresponds to the type of alarm you want to select. Then we have the limit for that specific alarm, the message that corresponds with that alarm, and then of course our priority and our selection. And this is laid out very similar to what we saw in the tag properties when we set up flow rate. So for this one, we're going to use the temperature tag. And I will begin by right-clicking and select Insert Tag, and I will search for temperature. I'll enter that in. My first type is going to be high, and I'm going to set the limit at 93. And you see that once I tab it over, it adds in 6 decimal places. And this is because the limit could be a real value. So they just simply allow you to enter in decimal places if you want. For us, temperature is an integer. We don't have to worry about it. So for the message, I'm going to put in too hot. Priority I'm going to set to 1. Selection I'm going to set to area A. Second line, I am going to copy the tag. In fact, I'm going to not only paste it on the second line, but also the third and the fourth. And then my type for line 2 is simply going to be high. The limit is going to be 80. And the message I'm going to put in, getting hot. Priority is 2, and it's area A. And then the third one will be a low, and I will put in a value of 30 for the limit. And the message will be getting cold. Priority 3, and area B. And then the last one will be low, low. And I will put a value of 10. And too cold for the message, priority 4, and area B for the selection. So now we have our 4 alarms configured in this worksheet. Now keep in mind that this does not tell me that these are the alarms. This just tells me what alarms are configured for this worksheet. And once I save it, I'm going to go up and close it. It'll ask me to save. I'll save it as sheet number 1. Click OK. And now if I come up here, back to the Home tab on the menu ribbon, and I click on the Object Finder button, I'm going to look for temperature. Once I have it selected, I'm going to click on Properties. And when I go to the alarms real/integer type, I see that I have my 4 alarms that I just entered in added to the tag properties, along with the group, which corresponds to the worksheet number here. So there are 2 ways to configure that. The first is to configure the tags and then add the worksheet. And then the second is just to add the worksheet and add the tags down on the worksheet body, and then it pulls it over to the tag properties. The thing to keep in mind, though, when handling alarms is that the tags are at the center. It's not the worksheets themselves, it's how the tags are configured. Okay, so now we are going to set up a screen to trigger and display the alarms. So I'm going to click OK to get out of Properties. On Project Explorer, I'm going to go to the Graphics tab, and I'm going to open the template screen. I'm going to save this as a new screen, and I'm going to name it Alarms. And once my alarm screen comes up, I am going to come up to the Graphics tab, and under Data Objects, the top one is Alarm/Event. I'm going to click on that to select, and on the screen I will click and drag to place an alarm event control object down. We'll double click to open the properties. And the object properties for the alarm event control are a little complicated sometimes to navigate. So we first have type, and we have the option here to select alarm online, alarm history and event, or event. If you're familiar with GP Pro EX, alarm online is similar to active. And alarm history would be the history or log. And then we have the option for event. The alarm event control object not only can display alarms, but can also display entries of the event logger that is inside of Blue Open Studio. And we will cover that in another video. And then we have the option to display both alarm history and entries from the event file. For us, though, we're going to leave this one set to alarm online. And then to the right of that, we have advanced. And in advanced, this is where you can set up how the alarm event control is formatted and what it displays. So at the top, we have the date and time format, and we can tell it what options we want to display. By default, everything except for millisecond is checked. And you see, depending on what we check, we have the sample down at the bottom that can change. We're going to leave it set to default. And delete message, if we had the security feature enabled, we would be able to put in a level that is required in order to delete an alarm off of the event control object. And we can select whether we want a confirmation message or not. Below that, we have acknowledgement, where we can enter in tags that can be used to acknowledge all or just acknowledge one. And this is for remote acknowledgement, where we don't have to interact with the alarm or event control. We can simply toggle the value of this tag, and we can acknowledge either all of the alarms or the selected one. Then we have the option for security level to do this and whether we require confirmation. And then we have the option for acknowledgement comment, meaning that whenever an alarm is acknowledged, if we select optional, it will pop up a window that allows you to enter in a message about why or how this alarm was acknowledged. And then you just can click OK. If it's set to optional, you can just click away from that without entering anything in and you're fine. If it's set to mandatory, you have to enter in a value. For us, we're going to leave it set to disable. And then disable acknowledgement and double click. With a tag or expression in here, When it evaluates as true, meaning non-zero, the user cannot acknowledge an alarm by double-clicking or double-tapping on them. By default, you're able to simply select with, say, a touch or with the mouse and double-click on it, and then it will automatically acknowledge the alarm. With a tag or expression in here that evaluates as true, that is disabled. And then we have a section for runtime returned values. And the tags entered in here will give us the values that we desire. So total items would give us the total number of items currently displayed on the alarm event control. For selected tag, if you enter a string tag in here, when you click on an alarm message, you will see the name of the tag associated with that alarm. First row text with a string array, this will give you the contents for the first row in the alarm event control object. If it's just a single tag, meaning no array, it would just give you the very first column that you have configured. Selected row text works the same way as first row, only now it's whichever row you have selected. And then summary changes. With an integer tag put in here, it will give you a running count of the number of changes made in the alarm event control. For example, when a new alarm occurs or when an alarm is acknowledged, the value of that tag will be incremented. Reordering or sorting does not count as a change. Then to the right of that, we have the runtime dialog triggers. And these are used during runtime to customize either the columns or filter columns visible in the object. So for example, columns will allow you to bring up a dialog that can select what columns are visible on the alarm event control, where filters will open a dialog box allowing the user to filter the columns visible. And then the save print with tags configured in here, we will either print a essentially screenshot of the alarm event control and send it to the default printer, or we will save the screenshot to a PDF file. And for the PDF file, then we have to put in the PDF file name here. We could put a tag in and dynamically set what that is, or we could put a static field in here. And then there's the option for multi-line, meaning that if text is going to be cut off based on the column width, it will then just insert another line for that alarm and continue with the text until it completes. Then we have a button for navigation triggers, and in here we can put tags in, and when these tags change value, we can scroll up, down, page, up or down, go to the top or go to the bottom without using touch on the screen. This may be useful if the screen resolution is too small to be able to properly manipulate the alarm event control with your touch. Instead, you want to use buttons. This would be how it's accomplished. For these settings though, I'm going to leave everything at default. And then to the right of that, we have fonts. And this is simply how we configure the font for display on the alarm event control. So for example, 10 might be a little too large for us for our demo. So I'm going to set it to 8. I'm going to leave everything else the same. As soon as I click OK, you see that the alarm event control changes to reflect the font size. And then below that, we have the filters button. And what this does is it allows us to filter alarms at runtime. So we can filter out things to display on the alarm event control. So the group field corresponds to the worksheet number that we save each alarm worksheet as. And then we have the selection, which when we configured, we put in area A, area B, and so on. Then we have the priority, and this we have a range. And it can be from 0 to 255, or you could put it from, say, 1 to 1. Then we have the type, meaning what type of alarm, high, 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 low, rate, deviation, plus, and so on. And then we have the state field, and this corresponds to the alarm status. By default, it's blank or 0, which means all alarms. We could set it to look at active and unacknowledged, active and acknowledged, inactive and acknowledged, or all inactive and unacknowledged. And these settings are located in the tech ref. If you search for alarms, you'll get what the values are and what state they correspond to. Then we have the search in columns. And what we can do here is we can enter in tags to search in the columns group. So whatever values you put in here, it will search those columns. And those are the only 3 that we currently have configured in here. And then the interval allows us to display either the last X number of messages or a certain period or time of day. And this is used only for events, not alarms. So this is disabled when we set it for alarms only. Then the filter expression will allow you to configure an expression that will filter out unwanted messages out of the display. And this is essentially a free form or free type of search or filter that we can use that's independent of any of the others for group or selection. We can include those in there, or we can go at something else like, for example, activation time. So if we want to look at an activation time greater than 3 p.m., we could enter it in for filter expression. And to do that, we would click on edit, and we'd enter it in here. We're going to leave it blank. Then below that, we have the initial sort. And we can sort by a total of 3 columns, and they go in priority that we see here. By default, we only have 1 column selected, which is activation time, and it's descending. We can select either ascending or descending, and any column that we have configured, we can select here for the initial sort. Then we have a checkbox for allow sort and runtime. If we uncheck this, we cannot sort, meaning click on the columns and sort by that. The default is checked, meaning that we can now click on, say, the time or the message and sort based on that column first. For us, we will leave everything blank on this. Click OK. And then the columns menu allows us to configure what columns we want to display by default on the alarm event control. So the initial setup has just the 4: the acknowledgement required, activation time, tag name, and message. And then we have below it the properties for the selected column. So for example, if I don't like activation time and I want to put in trigger time, I can come in here and just go trigger time. And then we have the width of the column itself, the alignment, and if we want a key to sort, meaning that when I hit this key, it will sort by that column. So I don't have to click on the column, I can just execute that keystroke. And then there's the option for available during runtime. These 4, since they're in the visible column here, will be available by default. If I come over here, then I can choose to deselect that it's available at runtime. And yes, you can also configure the properties for the available columns, not just the visible. So I'm going to cancel out of this because I want to leave everything default. Then we have the format group to the right of that, whether we can show the header or not, and whether we want to show grid lines or not. Then we have background color, and for this, I'm going to change it from black to white. And then the colors button will bring up the colors configuration window, and this would correspond to the colors that we saw for the alarm group. Since we have those enabled, these will not take effect. And in here, we can configure by group and the type, whether it's active or not, the type of colors that we want to use. But since we have the colors configured for each group, we don't need to configure this. So I'm going to click cancel. Then we have e-sign, which means anytime you interact with this, you'll be required to log in or electronically sign, and then enable translation, and then the virtual keyboard selection. So now we have our alarm event control configured properly. The next thing we want to do is put in a way to manipulate the values that we have set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my reports screen. I'm going to copy my temperature and flow rate sliders and paste them here. And then I will save. And I have to put a button to get to this screen, so I'll open Navigation. I will copy my reports button, and in the properties, I will change to open alarms, and the caption will be changed to alarms. Now I will save again, and I will close all three of these screens, and I will now start the runtime. And now with the runtime up, I will go to alarms, and we see now that we already have 3 alarms activated. We have the flow rate because there's a deviation error. So if I come within my range, you see that it now has recovered, but we now have the flow rate flux, meaning the rate was too fast. And then for temperature, we have the low and low alarms triggered. So as I slowly increase, we will see one recover or normalize, and then the second normalize. And then now if I come up too high, we now have our high, and high alarms. And for the flow rate, once it begins moving again, as soon as it gets within the proper rate of change, the alarm will be recovered. Now that we have an alarm event control configured that's able to display alarms, we need to look at the worksheets again. So if I go back into development, I go to tasks, and I open up both of my alarm worksheets, the save to disk option is unchecked. So I'm going to check that box on both, and that's it. I'm not going to check anything else. Now I will save, and now we'll close these. Now I will snap my development to the left, and I will snap my runtime to the right. And now I will start changing my alarms again. I will double click and clear out some of these. Add a few more. Now that we have that save to disk option checked, if I bring up Windows Explorer and I go to my application directory, which is BOS_training, and I go into my alarm folder, you now see that I have an alarm file here. And the extension is ALH. And you see that it starts with an AL, meaning alarm, and it gives us the date. 2 digits for the year, 2 digits for the month, and 2 digits for the day. So the alarm files are broken up by day, and the event files are broken up the same way by day. They are stored in the same folder, and they just start with an EV, and the file extension is .evt. When we look at events, we will go in more in depth. And you see that this is a ALH file, and it doesn't have a standard program assigned to it. But if I right click and try to open this with Notepad, I can open it up and I can take a look, and I can simply see the different fields that I have for this. So if I snap that to the right, I come back in, I bring up the tachref, and I search for .alh. I see that I get a topic called Format of the Alarm History. When I look at it, it gives me all of the columns and their description and what type of data type it is and the column name. So I can look at, I'll snap this to the left, I can look at this table in the tachref and then look at each line and determine what each piece of value for that specific alarm line, what it means. I'm going to close both of these. Back into the development, I'm going to open my alarm screen. I will maximize my development now, and I'm going to copy the alarm event control. We want to configure the filters for this new alarm event control. But before we do that, I want to add a few of the tags just so we can see the different methods on how to configure the filters. So under Project Explorer, I'm going to go to Global. I'm going to open my datasheet view for my project tags. And down at the bottom, I am going to add 2 tags. The first is alarm group, and leave that set as integer. I'm going to set the scope to local. And the second one will be alarm select, and I'm going to set that as a string, and the scope as local. And then I will close my project tags. And then back on the alarm screen, I will open the object properties for the new alarm event control. Click on filters. And for group, I will right click and select insert tag value. And I will select alarm group. And you see that it automatically put it in with curly brackets. So this time we didn't have to do it. But if we were to manually enter it in, for example, the selection is the same way, we would have to use curly brackets, and inside of this we would add in alarm select. And then priority, the from, we're going to add a tag called alarm min, and we have to create it. We'll set it to integer and local scope. And then 2 will be alarm max, once again an integer and local scope. And then the type, alarm type, alarm type. And the state will be alarm state. And you see that it didn't give me the type until I got out of the state as well. There is something set up differently on these 2 fields, but don't worry, it did come up and say that I need to create it, so I'll say yes. And the alarm type we will set to a string. The scope is local. And the alarm state we will configure as an integer with local scope. And then for the rest of the fields, we are going to leave them blank. So now we have our filters configured for this new alarm event control. So if I come back into the properties, the next thing we need to do is set up a way to modify those filters. So I could either use a database spy or put a bunch of text boxes on the screen in order to modify each one. Or if I go into advanced, I have my filters here. And if I put a tag in here, alarm filter, and I create it as a Boolean with local scope, click OK. I have a way now to display the filters, but I still have to trigger that. So back on the screen, I will place a button. So I'll go into graphics, and then button. I'll click and drag and add it to the screen. The caption will be display filters. And for command, under on up, I will change this type to a toggle tag. And then I will click on the Object Finder button and select Alarm Filter. So now we have our button configured and our filters configured. So I will save, close the screen, and then restart the runtime. Then I'll go back to my alarm screen. And you see here that I have nothing showing, even though I have several alarms. I will click on Display Filters, and it now brings up a predefined or pre-canned filters group. And here we can select what group we want to display and the selection, meaning is it going to be area A, area B, and so on. I can put a star in and do a select all. And then my priority is from 0 to 0. So if I put this in as 10, because we only went up to, I believe, 5, and then I make sure that for my group, I have both of them selected. If I click OK, I now see that I have my alarm show up. Well, it's the same exact alarms as I have up top. Let's say I only want to see my temperature. So I deselect flow rate, click OK, and now I just see my temperature alarms. So we did that with a single tag and that alarm filters. If we wanted to use the tags we set up for the filters, I'll snap the runtime to the right, development to the left. I will come to DB4, and I am going to insert my tags. So I'll first insert group, and then select, and then state, type, and finally my max. Now we'll drag this up a little bit just so we can see a little bit more. And you can see here that I have the same settings here as I do here, except for the group. The group only has one. And as you see, if I select flow rate and temperature and I click OK, you see that it goes to 0, meaning all of them. If I come back in and I just select flow rate, it selects 2. And then for selection is star. If I put a value in here, let me cancel out of this and let me actually enter in area A. You see now that it disappears because my selection is area A. And then we have the priority 0 through 10. Let me clear this out first so we can see them. And if I just make this 0 to 1, we will see almost all of them disappear. And we come back in and we see it here. So there are two different ways. The first is through the tags, where you can set up through scripting, database spy, through buttons on the screen, or by simply adding a tag into that alarm filters under advanced, we can toggle that to bring up this pre-canned filters window in order to filter the displays. So now I will show you a way to configure the alarm event control to mimic a very popular object inside of GP Pro EX. So for the alarms inside of GP Pro EX, we have what's called an alarm banner. Unfortunately, Blue Open Studio does not have that, but you can configure an alarm event control to mimic it. So I'll first open my alarm screen, and I'm going to leave the development and runtime laid out like this. What I'm going to do is copy the alarm event control object. I am going to shrink it down to where only the header is available. Double click to open the properties and uncheck the box for show header. And now we just have a single line. I can place it at the bottom of the screen, and I can resize to take up the whole screen or not. And then inside of here, I can set up advanced and enter in tags here, for example, total items, or I can come in under my filters, set these up the way I want, and then if I go under graphics, up at the ribbon menu up top, and I select visibility and position, I can configure an expression for visibility for this. So configuring the visibility animation for the alarm event control, resizing it like this will allow you to configure it to mimic the banner inside of GP Pro EX. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact ProFace America Technical Support by phone at 1-800-289-9266, option 2, or by email, support@profaceamerica.com. You can also visit our website, profaceamerica.com, for manuals, drivers, product FAQs, and other product and software information. Thanks again, and have a great day.